Well, folks, it's a couple of minutes after, not everyone's here, but it is time to start because you're here and you're on time. I want to talk today about South and Southeast Asia. That's this region. We won't get to all of it. We'll talk a little bit about Cambodia, a little bit about Myanmar, and a lot about Pakistan and India. Kind of a very deep subject. First of all, the culture is over 4,000 years old. So it goes back far, like the Egyptians, actually. And in the early stuff we'll see a lot of similarities between Mesopotamian culture, which here is Iran right there. And so Mesopotamia is not far off from there. I want to kind of start by saying I took a course in Indian art when I was in graduate school at the University of Wisconsin, and my teacher was a very learned man, and he was kind of funny. The first thing he did on the first day of class was that he came in and in a South Asian accent said, "You Americans, you think you are a melting pot, that you have people from all over the world in your country. Well, I am from India, and I say you're not a melting pot, you're a salad bowl. I come from India, and it is truly a melting pot." And to some extent, he spent the rest of the semester making his point that way, and that is that it's a very old culture, and we've seen many different cultures arise from this, especially from India, from this part of the world. And it's kind of an interesting story because all of this stuff seems to get assimilated. And that is that you'll find people that, and various religions and things, they go to war and ultimately they make peace. They adopt each other's gods. They accept the single form of government, and we move on. And so anyway, bottom line, we can talk about modern day India. It's not like this single culture. It's not this single kind of identity that you might find in the United States. And we got some things that we kind of all agree upon, at least to some extent. And first of all is that English is the language. What they're taught, what you're taught, what I was taught in school, and we try to bring everybody on the same page, even to the point where we have English as a secondary language and kind of keep things in order. In India, there are dozens of different languages. Have any of you seen the movie The Lion? No? Yes? No? You have. The one with Dev Patel, and he's adopted by an Australian parent.
Yes, I love that.
I love that movie too, and it was a good story in and of itself, but there were so many things that were accurate in that movie. And one of them was that he gets on a train and he wants to go to where he thinks his birth parents lived. And he gets on the train, and by the time he gets off the train, they speak an entirely different language. And in fact, various regions speak entirely different languages. And so he gets there and he doesn't even know how to communicate with these people, but it was a wonderful. And I got to throw in my own little 2 cents worth. I've always loved Indian culture. I always found it fascinating. And secondly, I adopted my daughter from China, so I could identify with that part of this story as well. And my daughter hasn't really expressed any desire to go to China and find her birth parents. But if she did, I'd help her any way I could. And so anyway, it's a very diverse culture and it's a very old culture. And so those factors lead to a kind of situation where when we study this, it's kind of like when we learned about iconography in Christianity. We see it early Christian art, Byzantine art, Gothic art. We see the evolution, but there's kind of a thread. In India, it's like that on steroids. It evolves over a longer period of time, and there are more belief systems involved. And so they start the chapter with this: the great stupa looking east. Sanchi, India, 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. And this actually has there's some similarity to some of the religious buildings that we've seen already in the Western cultures. And one of the issues that I think it really, in a lot of ways, so relevant is this. And this is the double staircase. And how you get through this is that you start here and you ambulate. Ambulate. Well, we've seen that in the Gothic cathedrals, the ambulatory, where you would go around and behind the altar and off to the sides, and you'd have these little devotional stations where you would stop and pray or meditate on a particular saint, Mary, Joseph, Christ, so on. And so this idea of circumambulating, that is very similar to a lot of things we've seen. I'm talking about Gothic, but there's your outline here. And this is the Torna, which is the gateway. And here are the stairways, and this is the upper level walkway, but you can actually enter in here as well. And so the stupa, shaped like a dome. We've seen domes as part of religious buildings too. We've seen that a lot. We saw, for instance, the Pantheon in Rome. What do? They put a dome on. We saw Hagia Sophia, a dome of the rock. I'm telling you, there's a lot of similarities here. And not to say that they actually influenced each other. And so this is the great stupa. This is the one, it's very well preserved, and it's the largest and the oldest. And so anyway, the mound contains relics of the Buddha. Wow. Wonder where that came from. Like a lot of other religions, we've seen that in Christianity. They have reliquaries inside a stupa. Get this. No, I had so many pictures I wanted to put in here. I'll show you in a minute. It's in the film. But in the center of this are the ashes of Buddha, the Buddha. And so anyway, this is, and there's so many things to say. It's hard to kind of keep it straight here, but I want to show you this. You see this topped by a pole marking the axis of the universe. So this is the center of the universe. This is something that's part of the belief system, and show you that this way. Chakras. And you see they're like umbrellas, one upon the other. This is an important part of Buddhism, by the way, because that form actually evolves into the pagoda. And a pagoda is an Asian Buddhist temple building, and they are multi-story, and each level represents another stage, a higher stage of enlightenment. And like the circumambulatory aspects of a Gothic cathedral, in the pagodas, there is a devotional station on each floor. And we'll talk about that when we see China and Korea. But at any rate, this marks the four directions: the south, the west, the east, and on the other side is the north Torna. And this is how one would do the circumambulation. This is by design. And what does this look like? It looks like a swastika. And I want to move on this because in Buddhist culture, the swastika means eternal. And so we saw the great mosque at Cordoba, and part of it was adorned with this swastika pattern. There are many indicators that there was a lot of exchange from east to west, and that quite possibly might be something that influenced architects, clerics, all the way over in Spain. The same. A lot of this stuff we don't know for sure, but this is really a holy symbol. And so I'm kind of going on here. And here are some depictions of the Buddha. Buddha stays around. He was actually a real person. He was born 4th century BCE. And Buddha himself was the son of wealthy parents. He was very privileged, and I've read too that part of the privilege was that he was born to a warrior class. So he had a couple of things going for him: power and wealth. And what happened? He went out and saw how the rest of the world lives. He saw poor people. He saw poverty. He saw sickness, disease. And he gave up his status, his wealth, his power, and his privilege, and began to fashion a life of actually a higher spirituality And if you want to kind of encompass that in a short phrase, it was basically how to be a better person. And so the Buddhism, it's kind of a little different than what we have seen so far, where we have depictions of a God and we pray to a God. This is more like a way of life, more than a devotion to a God or a person. And some people actually refer to it as the middle way because it is grounded in Hinduism, but I digress. Okay, so I got this video and of the Sanchi Stupa, and let me play it for you. It's just short and it's legit. Can you guys hear that?
Kachi is a great example of ancient Indian and Buddhist architecture, starting from the Mauryan Empire, 1st century BCE, continuing with the Gupta Empire, 5th century CE, and ending around 12th century CE. For that, let's look at the story of Buddha and what happened when he died. Because this Latin his first son, Sata, the top of the front face of the right pillar of northern gateway shows the vision of Buddha, a miraculous ladder presented by Brahma and Vishnu. The second panel shows young Siddhartha leaving his father's palace in the third panel represents Buddha teaching the Shakya. Buddha died in Kushinagar around 483 BC. According to Mahaparinibbana Sutta, after his death, Buddha was cremated and the ashes were divided among his followers. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. The king of Mallas brought the relics of Buddha to Kushinagar. The western gateway, rear top, shows the king sitting on an elephant bearing the relics into the town of Kushinagar. 7 neighboring kingdoms wanted a share of the relics. A war broke out and a siege was laid by the 7 kings. Seen here on the western gateway, 7 kings, distinguished by their 7 royal umbrellas, were advancing with their armies to the city of Kushinagar. On the southern gateway, we can see the victorious chiefs departing in chariots and on elephants with the relics on their heads. These relics were enshrined and worshipped in stupas by the royals of the 8 countries: Kapilavastu, Ramagala, Kushinagar, Pava, Mallas, Alakampa, Vaishali, and Magadha. Ashoka the Great after witnessing the mass deaths in Kashmir. He found many Buddhist stupas were in ruins. In the particular on southern gateway, King Ashoka is shown in green as the condition of the Buddha. He then built the Bodhi tree temple as shown top panel. In order to spread Buddhism, Ashoka tried to gather the 8 shares of the relics. However, he could get only 7 of them. He tried to secure the relics from Ramagrama as he was opposed by the powerful Nagas there. This act of resistance is shown here in the southern gateway. Ashoka distributed the 7 realms into 84,000 boxes made of gold, silver, crystal. He erected 84,000 stupas. Yes, you heard it right, 84,000, and kept his boxes inside the stupa. Even today, you can see that from Taxila in Pakistan to Nalanda in Bihar, from Sanchi in Madhya Pradesh to Sannati in Karnataka. That's the story of Sati Stupa and why it was there. It is a secret that Sati Stupa has survived for more than 2,000 years and it's the best preserved group of Buddhist monuments in India. It is 50 kilometers from Mumbai. It makes for an excellent vacation. When you are here, do not forget to circumnavigate the Kuba clockwise and see the capital of Ashoka pillar of Sanchi in the nearby.
So, as you can see, there are some similarities and there are many differences. A couple of things I want to point out from that video, when the various kingdoms wanted to separate out Buddha's ashes that were given out to 8 different stupas, I think he said. And then one wanted to consolidate a couple of hundred years later and put all of the ashes in the great stupa at Sanchi and only got 7 of those. Well, that was what I was referring to about being a lot of different countries in one country. It's a lot of different cultures and a lot of different kingdoms. I think if you were to think of it as Europe, that would probably be a good analogy, except for the fact that they have, as my Indian art teacher said, they were a stew. They were a melting pot, truly in the sense of melting together. And so, here, there's a couple of things here. One, this is from the East Gate, a scantily clad, sensuous woman called a Yakshi. And this is one of the recurring symbols and statues in Buddhist architecture and Hindu architecture, I might add too. And so she has here, she's voluptuous, and the idea of being fertile. Have we seen that before? As old as time, the Venus of Willendorf and some of the other Venuses that we've seen. Tradition is still alive here. And she's here with, she's here hanging on a tree that is bearing fruit and so on. And although she's scantily clad, she does have jewelry, so she is prosperous as well. And so in some ways they're different, in some ways they're a lot the same. We'll see a recurring motif, theme, if you will, with elephants. And that becomes very complicated as well, because in this case, the elephants are actually carrying royalty. We saw some of those scenes from the South Torna where Ashoka was trying to conquer these other lands and consolidate the ashes of the Buddha. And so when you see elephants, they could be military draft animals, or they could be Ganesh, which is the son of Shiva and his wife. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about fertility and vegetation. And here's another Yakshi, and she's holding a fly whisk. And this is where, and she is truly well dressed, although she like not hardly dressed. But bottom line is, she's wearing finery, jewelry, has a whisk. That's just to keep the flies away, actually, and so on. Now, one of the things, and there's the detail of what we were just looking at. Some more Buddha, swastika. This persists. And so anyway, Buddha becomes sort of what gets depicted, the person who gets depicted. And this is in the Common Era. And Buddha, the depiction of him will change over time and place as well. And so this is the 2nd and 3rd century Common Era. And this is probably more like what people expect when they see a Buddhist statue, a statue of the meditating Buddha, 2nd century Common Era. And so this is kind of typical. He meditates. He's kind of got some royal clothing to indicate importance. Look down here. Lions. We've seen lions before. A lot. They use lions for a lot of different messages, and some of which we were still not sure of. It's powerful. Makes for a nice royal symbol. We see that even through medieval Europe. Let's see coats of arms with lions on them, and we got kings that named themselves after lions, such as Richard the Lionhearted. We go through Mesopotamia, the lion hunt, the Ishtar Gate, the Lion Gate from ancient Greece, pre-classical Greece. So anyway, lions here too become a recurring motif. And this is one of the few examples of painting. And it is of Cave 1, Ajanta, India. And so one of the things about this, when we're talking about Indian art, is that we don't see much painting. We just got off of seeing a whole lot of painting in Italy. We don't see much here. And it's probably not because they didn't do it, but if you think of the climate of India, it's not particularly archival. It's hot. They have rainy seasons. It's a climate, and of course there are different climate zones to be sure, but none of them are very conducive. They're not very conducive to have paintings last a long time. So this is in a cave, which explains why it exists. And if you think about the climate of, say, Egypt, and we got a lot of painting from Egypt, but most of that painting we have is in tombs and temples, many of which have been sealed off for millennia, and thereby preserves these paintings. And so Bodhisattva, this is a Buddhist idea. And in a lot of ways, Buddhists have this kind of rigid organization, like, say, Catholics. But they have people that are higher in stature when it comes to the practice of their religion. And a bodhisattva is one of them. Anybody know what a bodhisattva is? Steely Dan, that song, Bodhisattva? Don't know. Bodhisattva is a person who has achieved enlightenment in this life, but refused to go to nirvana, which is like paradise, like heaven, refused to go in order to help others on this earth achieve enlightenment. So in a lot of ways, he's kind of like a wise person. He's kind of like a priest or an imam, just say. And so bodhisattva is kind of along those lines. And so what we have here is one of those rare examples. And so the life and the death of Buddha from Gandhara, Pakistan, 2nd century, Common Era. And we see the Buddha here. We see the death of the Buddha. We see Buddha in life. One of the things about Buddhism, and as with Hinduism as well, and this is a little different than some of the religions we've seen, but not all, that they believe in reincarnation, that you can come back. In fact, you keep coming back until you achieve enlightenment, and then you stay in nirvana. But that goes along with the levels of enlightenment that you see in a pagoda as well. Get higher and higher until you achieve nirvana. But Hindu religion is pretty much the same way. And when you get reincarnated, you can come back as another person, but you can also come back as an animal, which is, and a lot of that part of the belief system shows up in the artwork. So as much as we study Christian iconography as a way to get into what this artwork is all about, same thing happens with Indian art. And so Buddha seated, Mathura, India, 2nd century, Common Era. And so you see in the evolution here, and this is getting much more closer to what we expect a Buddha to look like. And I'll go back a little bit. We kind of think about a Buddha as being like this, or like this. Oh, I want to show you this too. But after a while, we don't see depictions of the Buddha so much. As a matter of fact, what happens with Buddhism is that kind of does two things. One, it gets incorporated into Hinduism. Hinduism is a polytheistic, multi-god belief system, and it evolves. And so a lot of Buddhism gets incorporated into Hinduism, and Buddhism spreads out. And Buddhism becomes really one of the main, probably the main religion in China, Japan, Korea, while Hinduism, as I was talking about the melting pot versus or the salad bowl versus the stew, what we got is that it gets incorporated into Hinduism. But when you start to see this, this is a depiction of Buddha. And oftentimes what you'll see is a hand, the swastika that means the eternal, which is part of the floor plan of the stupas, and the circle, which itself means eternal. Has no beginning, has no end. It kind of keeps going around, like the swastika. And so there's another depiction you'll see from time to time of the Buddha where you really just see a set of footprints, and that represents the Buddha. So anyway, these are all still early 2nd century Common Era. And there's the wall painting, the life and the death of the Buddha seated on a lion's throne, as I showed you. Buddha preaching first sermon. So they're really kind of digging into the life of the Buddha. And so he's meditated, he's preaching, and you still have trappings of royalty here. And another aspect of this, and all of these depictions actually look more like South Asian depictions. What we'll see when Buddhism moves into China, Buddha starts to look more Asian. And this is from Sri Lanka, what for a long time was called Ceylon. And this is the death of the Buddha, laying down peacefully at rest. And so there are a lot of traditions in this part of the world, and this is the Great Bath, pre-Buddhist, and this is Mohenjo-Daro. And this is a village in Pakistan, and at its height, it probably had a population of about 35,000. But see, this is really old. It's 4,500 years old. So it ranks up there in age with some of the places in Mesopotamia and in Egypt. It really goes back that far. And this was a place, it's a public bath where people would go and bathe and clean and hang out. But this had a village. It was all mostly done with masonry and this other stuff. I wrote the name of it down. I don't know what the heck was it. Anyway, it's this stuff that's like asphalt, and you can get it naturally. It's part of it's natural distillation of oil, and so it's like a lot of this was covered with that kind of asphalt, and no longer there. But we know what was happening in this village of 35,000 people. They had amenities like running water and toilets and things. This was like really quite a well-developed city, especially given how old it was, how early it was. And and so we have some other things from this area. Harappa, Pakistan male torso. I think this is really kind of an interesting tell. How human beings are portrayed. And what we have here, it's they call this, it's I was looking at this in the book, and it's called swelling curves. One of the things that you find in Hindu depictions, Hindu and Buddhist depictions of the human figure, is that, for want of a better word, they're a little more chubby. Their belly. You wouldn't see anything like that in ancient Rome or Greece. In fact, a lot of those kind of sculptures, they got six-pack abs and stuff, and they have all the muscles and everything. It was an idealized version of people, period, especially male figure. In this case, it's a lot different. And this way of portraying people persists for centuries upon centuries. I'm going to take a look back here, and part of that may account for why we see. So the Yakshi, not really thin, actually, it's kind of some weight to her. So that's really how they depict the human figure. And so, not always, but a lot of times, it's got some weight. And this is a rope figure from the same place, Mohenjo-Daro, 1,000 years ago. And one of the aspects of this is that it has what they call the trefoil motif, and that is the three-petaled flower. And that is all over in Mesopotamian art, and it does suggest that there was cultural exchange, as I showed you, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, all countries right there in a row, right there in the same part of the world, likely crossing. Seal with seated figure in yogic costume. It's the seated figure. It's in reverse. And it's in reverse. Why is that? Well, I'll tell you. A seal. This is something where we've seen this in Mesopotamia and Egypt and in a lot of cultures in antiquity, how people would authenticate documents would be that they pour wax and then they put this as kind of a stamp. We still use that, like a seal of approval, seal SEAL, not the animal. And so that's what's going on. And it's got a posture that looks like yoga, which is where yoga comes from too. This part of the world is like given a lot to humanity. But that's really what this is. And it kind of predicts the kind of depictions that you'll see with Buddha himself. And so lion pillar and Gathgar and Dan Garth, lion pillar. And this, again, this could come out of Mesopotamia. It actually could come out of a lot of different cultures. But the idea of erecting a pillar as a monument, and here is the capital of the lion pillar, set up by Ashoka, which is the guy who consolidated all of the ashes, and he was a Buddhist king, very avid Buddhist. And we don't see the depiction of the Buddha here, but we do see the wheel. And how many of you are familiar with the flag of India? Ooh, no, I'm going to have to bring some more illustrations. It's a tricolored flag, and in the center is a wheel, just like this. And it depicts the eternal. And so, like I said, a lot of this stuff is very complicated. The iconography is kind of hard to tease out, but you don't have to understand everything to get some meaning from this. But as all of this time we were talking about Christian art, and I was saying, this is Saint Mark, this is Saint George, this is the Virgin Mary, this is the youngest disciple, Saint John, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, when you understand a religion, you understand why their art looks like it does. And I think that I've been reviewing some ideas of this course, and I think that politics is kind of a theme, but it seems to be kind of a minor theme. I think religion is what the majority of the artwork we've seen is dedicated to, what it's about. And so these are three religions of India, and I hope it's not too loud. We'll see.
Searching for a truth and vision beyond the immediate, you need to believe the power that animates all living things and surroundings. Man,
Hear that in the back?
Religion gave meaning to his existence. India gave birth to two of the world's greatest religions, which shall not be mutual functions. They are Hinduism and Buddhism. Hinduism is considered to be a civilization as well as a confluence of religions, which has no single factor, those who believe to have emerged from the universe. It does not have a central authority, hierarchy, or organization. Hinduism is not a religion that is preached, and it draws from many philosophies, enriching itself in the process. Buddhism is based on the teachings of Gautama Buddha, who attained nirvana after leaving behind the glorious life of a prince and going out in search of a higher Jainism, as is practiced today, was founded by Mahavira, who was amongst the 24 Tirthankars. Interesting, the three religions share cultural and geographical origin. While Hinduism was already established as a religion and way of life in the subcontinent and in the economy, remained mostly confined within the borders of India. Many early Buddhists had been Brahmins educated in Upanishad. The Buddha, however, rejected the role of these scriptures in attaining salvation. He redefined existing concepts, molded them to explain his meaning. He proclaimed that to attain salvation, one did not have to accept God or the scriptures. These novel ideas were later incorporated into Indian religious thinking as well. The movement of Buddhism through Asia was successful mainly because of its
Yeah, this is what I was talking about.
Because of its spirit of accommodation and its general fluidity, which each new culture this was done without compromising its core concerns. Its own forms of Buddhism, its own organizational structure and spiritual. Interestingly, it was not zealots or Honda missionaries who worked to spread Buddhism, but monks and scholars, savants from different countries. Century BC, when Emperor Ashoka established its cause. Rather than force his subjects to adopt Buddhism, he spread awareness by posting edicts engraved on iron pillars and rock throughout his realm. These edicts were ethical and inspirational. He sent missionaries throughout the land and beyond shores. Ashoka was one of the most influential advocates of the Buddhist faith. Where Jainism is concerned, it was already an established religion in several Indian provinces before Mahavira or the Buddha began their teaching. Places like Magadha, Koshala, Kapilavastu, Vaishali, Mithila, Varanasi, Simbhaguri, Kaushambi, and Avanti were prominent Jain centers. Jainism also reached southern India where it flourished. Savants like Bhadravahu and Vishakhacharya, along with their disciples, migrated from the south and propagated the faith. There was a spirit of religious tolerance in these lands. This royal patronage resulted in the commissioning of numerous Jain temples and sculptures through the ages, and support for literary and scholarly ventures. At the end of the 4th century, it is said that a Mongolian came to the and a band of Jain ascetics led by Super Evelyn Bhadravahu anticipated a severe famine in their country and migrated to Shravanabelagola in today's Karnataka state. From there, they started spreading the gospel of the Tirthankaras. Later, their disciples, under the leadership of Sankaracharya, moved to the Chola Empire kingdoms, continuing with their mission of spreading Jainism. The migrant monks were supported in the south by householders of the faith. It was not customary for the monks to accept from people of other faiths. One of the many interesting sidelights of these three religions is the cultural profusion they left in their way. Art and literature flourished, starting out as expression of religious faith and ending up as invaluable artistic legacies. The use of symbolic forms in India dates back to the Harappan scenes. The 5 altars of the Vedic period had astronomical and mathematical significance. Their evolution resulted in the later Hindu temples. Even though religion is seen to have inspired a large part of ancient Indian art, it is also an expression of Indian life, its natural background, and social and religious traditions. Its style, Jain, and artistic perspective have little to do with individual religious doctrines. Instead, it derives from a legacy of Indian traditions, symbols, and designs. However, when we look at major artistic models, we find they were inspired by Buddhism. Though earlier structures have been referred to in texts, there is no physical evidence of their use. In fact, there is a great period on decline and rock-cut monuments inspired Hindu to create their own monuments. Buddhism, which once spurned the realm of metaphysics, was only the powerful essence of life, had undergone transformation with the advent of Mahayana Buddhism. This is significantly early Buddhist art of Parvata, Sanchi, Bodhgaya, and Amravati, monsters presence combination of Buddhist art and lead a conflagration of ancient influence in the single temples of Ellora and Ajinta. These rock-cut caves are a reflection of the religious expression of the three religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. There is no doubt that Ajinta and Ellora, known previously as Veru, represent not only the relationship between these three religions, but also the heights to which their respective artists and craftsmen have taken their religious concerns. These caves are an enlightening showcase of religious, artistic, and social.
I gotta move this. See. I don't get this. Why can't I see this? We'll get there this way. So anyway, I showed you a lot of stuff. Make sure I got my share for the folks at home. Looks good. So anyway, just to kind of recap what we've seen so far, is that there are three religions prominent that have their origins in India, and they kind of adopt each other's principles and teachings and incorporate them into their own. Buddhism spreads far and wide. Jainism pretty much stays local. And Hinduism is kind of the more long-lasting and the predominant religion in India today. In fact, my Indian art teacher talked about how even though India was the birthplace of Buddhism, there are very few Buddhists there today. It's mostly a religion, as you saw on the map, that kind of spread out. I have a couple of things that I found. I want to state just for the record. One of the things that my teacher told me was that the people of India were very hardworking people. And when Alexander the Great reached the Indus Valley in 326 BCE, his soldiers refused to go any farther. And that had been believed for a long time to be the source of the word industry and India. And I looked it up, and a lot of scholars now, they don't believe that. In fact, they say industry is from a Latin word, industria, just saying. You might run across it in your studies. One of the things that is true, and we got records of the kind of the West meeting the culture in South Asia. was Alexander the Great. And he wrote about the Jains, which is that third religion. He called them the naked philosophers because mostly they'd given up all worldly comforts and possessions, and for the most part didn't wear much clothing either. So anyway, that's how the West knew Jainism for a few centuries. And so I got a lot more. I don't know how much more would be productive to go into. I gave you a lot to think about. And it's Wednesday. We may not get very many more nice days. Any questions about this or the PowerPoint? Okay. That's my last chance to talk to you in person until next week. See ya. Have a good weekend. And we'll talk about more of the iconography and Buddhist temples and Hindu temples.